Again, my name is Shay Raybold from Kentucky Housing Corporation, and thank you all so much for joining us today. We are here to talk about the open ESG application round that we have going on right now. And so we will walk through what to expect with the ESG application. I'm sure folks probably want to know this. Yes, this is being recorded, and we will make the recording available on the ESG webpage in the next day or so, as well as a copy of the slides. So you can go back and review what we share today in case you missed something or need a refresher or want to share it with any of your colleagues or partners in your community. I think you should be able to see my screen that has kind of a cover slide on there. Lindsay Anderson, I just told you I wasn't going to call on you, but I am again from KHC. Can you just confirm that you can still see that now that we've started the meeting?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'm going to turn my camera off just so I do not distract myself while I'm going through these slides. But I did just want to say good morning to everybody, and so you could see who's talking to you. But I'm going to turn my camera off now. I do want to say we do have several KHC staffers on the call. In addition to myself, I will not go through and introduce everybody. But I appreciate those folks being here, and everyone, including just regular attendees, non-staff, you should be able to unmute yourself if you have a question, and we can take questions at the end or during the webinar. You can also use the chat feature up in the top of your panel. Most likely you should have a chat icon where you can type in your questions. And I have Michelle Singer is going to be monitoring those and stopping me as we go as needed if I don't catch those. So what I'm saying to my KHC colleagues is please feel free to jump in at any point if you want to add anything to what I've said or make any clarifications or corrections if I have said something in error. Hopefully that won't happen, but luckily we've got a good team here. So on this call today, I looked quickly at who had registered. I know we have a mix of folks who've done ESG for a number of years, as well as some folks that this will likely be their first time applying for ESG. So as we do with most things, we have to approach this from two audiences, those that have never applied for ESG, as well as those who have. So for those of you all who may be more seasoned, this will be very familiar to you. There's very few changes compared to the last time we did this application round, which was back in 2024, which was, I guess, kind of an eternity ago. So this will be a good refresher for you. But just know that there's people on this call as well who've never done this. So we kind of cover a lot of the kind of the bases. And all right, so let's just get going here. So as you know, because you found your way to this webinar, we at Kentucky Housing Corporation, we are the recipients of the ESG grant, or ESG funding, I should say, from HUD for the 118 counties outside of Lexington and Louisville. And as part of that position, we operate a competitive funding round to award funding to partners across the 118 counties outside of Fayette and Jefferson. And last week, I think it was Wednesday, we officially opened up this current funding round by issuing what's called a Notice of Funding Availability, or NOFA. And it is, and I'll get into this in a moment, for program years 2026 and 2027, and I'll talk about what that means in the next slide or two. As I indicated a few moments ago, you should be able to see in the chat a link to the ESG page on KHC's website. That is where you're going to be able to find the NOFA. NOFO is Notice of Funding Opportunity, which means the same thing, but that's what we use in the COC program. So we're continuing to use NOFA over here for ESG, just to keep ourselves a little bit straight on what we're talking about. But anyway, the NOFA, as well as other ESG materials, can be found on our ESG webpage, and I strongly encourage you to check those out. This is an example, a screenshot of the ESG webpage as it looks right now. If you were to go to it, you can see at the top under application materials, you can find the NOFA, as well as several other documents that are very important. Some are required attachments, others are, let's just go through them for a second here. The second document is what's called the certifications and assurances. That's a document that you have to sign and agree to several different things as part of the application process and attach it to your application. You want to take a look at that, make sure your organization is able and willing to agree to the requirements in those certifications and assurances. The blank sample application is a really important document to take a look at. This is a PDF version of the application. The application has to be completed in KHC's online platform called the Universal Funding Application. So you complete the application electronically, but I don't know about you guys. I like to see what I'm getting ready to get myself into before I have to click through lots of pages and go through all that kind of stuff. So what we've done is we've provided a blank sample application for you. Take a look at that so you know what's coming at you before you get in and start doing the electronic version. It just will give you some good information, help you be prepared. If you are applying for emergency shelter funding, you have to have a certificate of local approval for your emergency shelter signed by the unit of local government in your area where you're located. So that could be a county government or a city government. That's a copy of the form that you would use. Again, that's only for shelter. And then there are two versions of the score sheets that we will use. One is just for the rapid rehousing component. The other is for the other components. And so what you want to do is take a look at these score sheets, see how we're going to be scoring you to help inform your program design, help inform how you answer your questions, etc. And then, of course, there's a link to the UFA where you will complete the application. And down below here under ESG application webinar, that's where we will post the recording as well as these slides. So I mentioned when we got started that this application round is for program years 26 and 27. And so, you know, the reason we use the term program year, one of the reasons is it follows a July, the allocations of funding from HUD follow a July to June allocation, and which is different than a federal fiscal year or maybe even some of your own fiscal years if you use something different. So to keep everybody in line, what we're talking about is program years of July to June. But anyway, so what that means is instead of having a competition next year, what we intend to do is for those projects awarded funding this year, program year 26, you will automatically be renewed for the 27 allocation so long as you meet certain minimum thresholds. And funds continue to be available from HUD because Congress has to appropriate the funds for 27, HUD has to allocate those. But let's assume that everything goes as planned. The plan is for us to have a competition this year and then not have one next year and have more or less automatic renewals. And then the next competitive funding round won't be until 2028. And the kind of middle bullet points on this slide will show you what the grant terms are. It gets a little confusing because you actually have 18 months to spend each allocation. And the 26 allocation would start July 1st of this year, and you'd have through December 31st, 2027. You would get your 27 allocation next July of 27 and have another 18 months. So there is a period of time where theoretically you could have both allocations overlapping. If you budget for just 12 months, then you would, start spending your 27 out money immediately after you had spent your 26 money, or you could have those overlapping. Anyway, we can answer questions about that if needed, but the good news here, the main point is you don't have to do an application next year if you are successful this year, except for my last bullet, which is a little bit of caution, which is simply to say that it's our intention to have this 2-year funding round, if you will. But that is subject to change if there are any policy changes or directives from HUD or any unexpected circumstances that arise, such as a global pandemic or something like that, that hopefully will not happen, that would cause us to need to rethink how we allocate our funds. But assuming none of that happens, it's a 2-year funding round. So eligible components for ESG, this is really important because people can get confused on what's eligible and what's not in terms of project types. There are 5 eligible components. Actually, there's technically 5 components in one activity. 4 of those we consider project types, and that would be street outreach, emergency shelter, and emergency shelter can include both services for people staying in your shelter, shelter operations, as well as renovations. You don't have to use the funds for all of those, but those are the eligible activities. Homelessness prevention and rapid rehousing. So those are essentially, think of those as our main project types if you're going to be applying. There's also the homeless management information system is a component type, but it's not a standalone project type that you can request. You can only request funds for HMIS if you are applying for one or more of the above 4 project types. And then you can apply for up to 3.75% of the total amount you requested for all the other project types to be used for administrative activities. And we refer to that as admin. And each of these, as you can see, I have a regulation citation next to it. The ESG program is governed by the regulations at 24 CFR 576, and each of these numbers that follow the 576 are the individual sections where you can learn more about these. But you can get 3.75% for admin, and if you are one of those folks that's actually going to go look very closely at the regulations, which you should, you will notice that it says you can have 7.5% in admin, and you might be thinking, I can have 7.5%. Why did Shay tell me only 3.75? The reason why is because we split the admin money between KHC to help administer ESG overall, and you all, the subrecipients. So we each get 3.75%. Now you know the secret. Okay, so who can apply for the money? Local governments can apply, as well as nonprofit organizations. So for-profit organizations cannot apply. Something that is important to know is the money can only be used in the 118 counties outside of Lexington, Fayette County, and Louisville, Jefferson County. They have their own ESG application or allocations. So if you happen to be on this call and you're interested in using money in Fayette or Jefferson, you are not eligible, unfortunately, but you could apply to your local governments there for the funding. As always, faith-based organizations are eligible to apply, and we do have some that are recipients. But per the federal regulations, all ESG funded activities must be provided in a manner that is free from religious influence. And so, for example, you would not be allowed to require participation in religious services or study or anything like that, but you still would be eligible if you could provide it in a manner that's free from religious influence. And then something else that's important is we have set a policy that we will only fund shelters that are open year-round, all year. So what this bullet says is shelters that are not open year-round are not eligible to apply for ESG funding. And so that would be your seasonal shelters that only operate during the winter months, or those that might pop up just from time to time. We've got several wonderful programs like that. We just don't have enough money to support everything. And so that is one of the policy decisions we've made to try to provide funding to services that are available all year. So funding parameters, this is the same as it has been for several years. The most amount you can request for all components is $150,000 per application. I do want to point out the second bullet for any of our victim service providers that are on the call. Those are folks who serve domestic violence folks, as well as others fleeing similar situations. We had this policy last year, so this is our second year. If you are a VSP and you are requesting funding for shelter activities, you can only request up to $100,000 for shelter activities, as opposed to asking for the full $150,000. You can still ask for $150,000 total, just like everybody else, but that extra $50,000 would have to be for other activities. So essentially, you would be limited to $100,000 for your shelter as a VSP. The reason for this primarily is because of the potential access to other federal funding for domestic violence shelters that's available to VSPs, where, and I know that's competitive and hard to get as well, we acknowledge that, but the other shelters, the non-VSP shelters, do not have access to any other regular federal funding. So that's the reason we made that decision. An organization may only submit one application. Hang on, let me make sure I'm saying this. You can submit more than one application if you operate a shelter in more than one county. So you could do an application for one county and then another application for another county. We don't have many of those situations, but we do have some. If you are an organization that operates 2 shelters within one county, you can also apply or submit 2 applications, but if you're a shelter thinking about doing that, you have to make your case for why that's necessary and why you shouldn't be considered just one shelter. And we encourage you to contact us in advance to talk it through just to make sure. And then no more than 2 applications per organization under the circumstances above. And this is probably a good time for me to say, I should have said at the beginning, I think many of you all know this, but the amount of funding that's available for ESG is extremely limited relative to the need and the demand. Our allocation for FY26, program year 26, is about 2.6 million. I think it's 2,690,000 overall. 2,600,000. I can't say the numbers because I've confused myself with the points, but it's about 2.69. Let's go with that, $1 million. That is only $30,000 more than we received last year. And essentially it's been around 2.5, 2.6 for many, many, many years. So, and that is because it's a formula-based allocation from HUD that is based on Congress keeping the level of funding for ESG flat at $290 million nationally. $290 million is all that is there for ESG across the entire country. But it's been at that level for many, many years. So what that means for us is we have to make really hard decisions of how much money we can award, which is why this is so highly competitive and why we have to have these caps. It also means that in order for us to fund any new projects or to increase funding for existing projects, we essentially have to cut others within our communities because there's not, except for that extra 30,000, essentially. Yay, extra 30. But just know that there's not enough money. We all know that already, but what you do is very important. But this competition is a serious one because it's how we have to decide how to spread the money around the best we can. All right, so match requirement. There is a match requirement for the ESG program. Unlike the COC program, which is just 25%, the ESG program is actually a dollar for dollar match requirement. That's a HUD requirement of 100% match. So if you get a grant of 100,000, you're going to have to also have match of 100,000. And it can be in cash or in kind. It must be, in order to be counted towards match, it must be for an eligible ESG activity, which means it's something that you could have otherwise used ESG funds for per the regulations. And you can read more about that at 576.201. Okay, so application submission deadline, you probably know this already because if you're like me, it's like the first thing you look at. But just a reminder, it is Friday, May 15th, so just over a month away at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. So as I mentioned earlier, you have to submit your application in the UFA, which stands for Universal Funding Application System. That is a platform that is housed and maintained by KHC on our website. It's used by other funding sources as well. You access it at the link that's shown here. You can find that link on our ESG page as well as in the NOFA and the egrams. You can Google it. You can go to our KHC's website, however you need to get there. Once you get there, you have several steps to take, but eventually what you're looking for is the funding round called 2026-27 Emergency Solutions Grant Application. It's under the Specialized Funding tab. And that's important because when you go there, you're going to see some other applications for other departments at KHC, and you're not going to most likely know what they are. You might be a little confused. What is this? This is what you're looking for. The other ones are for home, single family development, multifamily development, other competitions, this is the one you're looking for. If you have any questions about how to use the UFA, there is an FAQ section that is very helpful, and I encourage you to take advantage of that. Here is kind of what the UFA FAQ section would look like once you get there. It's got lots of things. How do I do various things? Like, for example, at the bottom, how do I create an application, etc. If you're new to the UFA, one of the first things when you get to the main page is you want to register and create an account. And when you are registering, you want to select admin from the drop-down box if you will be the person from your organization that will be managing the various users from your organization who may have access to the UFA. We strongly encourage that as an organization, you have at least 2 people with accounts in the UFA. If something happens to one of you, you want the other person to be able to access your account, access the application, etc. So again, please try to have at least 2 users. And that's where you would do that under create a team before you create the application. I'm not going to go through what this all says, but this is just an example of under the FAQs. It tells you how to create a team, which basically means giving team members access to your organization's application or applications. Think of it as you are creating an account for your organization, essentially, and then there's various users. Again, this is kind of what creating an application looks like. My point in having these up here to show you is that there is useful information. It looks like a lot, but it's very straightforward. But if you go through these steps and still have any trouble, you can reach out to us and we can assist you. This is something that is a big request, so please listen carefully. Once you've created your team and you are now ready to create an application, it's going to ask you to come up with a name for your application. I think it's a pop-up. And it says like application name. It's just a little box. And it's really, really important that you understand that that application name that you use is not just something you guys see from your organization in the UFA when you log in. It's actually what we see on our end once you submit it. And so we request strongly that you include your organization's name in the application name, so that we know whose application belongs to which organization. So it could simply be organization name 2026 ESG grant application or 2026 emergency solutions grant application. So as it shows on the slide, a good example would be Warren County Homeless Coalition 2026 ESG application. A bad example would be 2026 ESG application. The reason for this is when 40 of you guys submit your applications and they're all named 2026 ESG application, we cry. And it's really painful because we don't know whose application belongs to who, and it's not fun. So now you understand why we make this request. It'll be very helpful to us. If you've already created one and you named it 2026 ESG application and did not put your agency's name, guess what? You can go back and rename it before you submit it, and there's instructions on how to do that. So now I'm going to go through our policy priorities, which are the same more or less as they were during our last application round in 2024. The reason they haven't changed much is because they're all connected more or less to a very simple principle of making sure our goal of making sure that homelessness is rare, brief, and non-recurring. And they all more or less fit into that. Getting people out of homelessness quickly, into housing, and keeping the housing. All of this is detailed in the NOFA. So I'm going to try to make myself not go on and on too much about all of these, but I do just want to hit some of the high points. All the projects, regardless of what kind you're asking for, whether it's shelter or rapid rehousing or otherwise, are expected to be housing focused, and in both the project overall and how you design the project. We are focused on reducing unsheltered homelessness to the greatest extent possible. That can be done in a variety of ways, including increasing the amount of street outreach we have if we don't have it in certain areas, and increasing the availability of low barrier shelter. We want to continue to reduce homelessness among individuals, families with children as well, of course, but I'll touch on why individuals in just a moment. We want to continue to expand the availability and flexibility of rapid rehousing. That doesn't mean everyone has to ask for rapid rehousing. We used to require that. We don't anymore. But we are looking at some policy changes from HUD where we might not be able to use as much COC funding for rapid rehousing. So we want to continue to invest as much ESG in rapid rehousing as we can. And then reducing returns to homelessness by helping people increase their income, and making sure that our projects individually contribute to the success of our entire system to help reduce homelessness. So let's go through these just a little bit. Again, the goal of being housing focused is to end a person's homelessness or to prevent it from happening entirely in the first place, if possible. The focus is to quickly connect people experiencing homelessness and housing instability to permanent housing, and to work with them. And that might take lots and lots of effort to keep them housed. And then staff engagement, services, project design, everything is oriented towards finding housing, obtaining housing, and maintaining housing, in particular permanent housing to end a person's homelessness. So essentially from the get-go, once you establish a person's and take care of their immediate needs, the focus is on housing for them. So as part of being housing focused, as it relates to the application, if you are applying for a shelter, prevention, or rapid rehousing, you will be required to attach a written termination policy for each component you are applying for. All ESG recipients are required to have a written termination policy as part of the ESG and KHC policy, ESG interim rule, which means federal regulations, as well as KHC policy. And so we've done that for several years, but just know that that is an attachment. Again, that's something that if you were looking at the blank sample application, you would see there's a required attachment section. You can see what's coming there. Reducing unsheltered homelessness. Again, we are looking to fund street outreach if it doesn't exist, or if there's not enough of it in certain areas. Again, we don't have a ton of ESG money, so historically we've not put a lot into street outreach, but if it's a need in your area and it's something you're interested in, we certainly encourage you to apply for street outreach. Low barrier shelter is very important, and what we mean by low barrier is that you reduce the number of requirements to access shelter, such as not having blanket criminal background checks and not requiring drug testing, etc. No requirements to participate in services or programs in order to receive the shelter. Shelters work to screen people in and not out. Shelters are working to try to keep people in shelter while a permanent solution is found, and not setting up so many rules that people just essentially return back to an unsheltered situation. Now, unsheltered or low barrier does not mean no barrier. You can still have various policies, but we do ask that your policies or rules are carefully considered and not arbitrary. And in the application, you will see that you get points for being low barrier, and we go through various examples of what that could mean. If you do have certain policies in place, you have an opportunity, you lose points, but then you have an opportunity to explain why it's in place. And you have the ability to get some points back if it is if there's a good legitimate reason for doing so. But again, we're trying to get people off the streets, into shelter, into housing. So reducing barriers is an important way to do that. So if you're applying for shelter funding, it's really important that you know that you cannot require people staying there to have income. That is something that's not allowed per our policies. You cannot require people to participate in supportive services like life skills or budgeting classes or substance use recovery, or to complete certain programs in order to stay in your shelter. You can absolutely, and you should, provide those types of services and offerings, and encourage people to participate, incentivize people to participate. But it can't be a condition of staying in the shelter. Again, the shelter is meant to be for crisis purposes, getting folks out of unsafe situations and into permanent housing. And then your shelter cannot require a criminal background check or a warrant check prior to shelter admission, with the exception of you are allowed to check sex offender status if your shelter serves households with children. Okay, let's talk about us prioritizing reducing individual homelessness. Now, obviously, we want to reduce family shelter or family homelessness as well. And by family, what I mean is households with an adult and children. But the reason we want to make sure we're focusing on individual homelessness as well is because our data consistently shows, and you probably know from your own communities, that the majority of folks that are experiencing literal homelessness are individuals. We do have lots of families. We need shelter for them. We need programs for them. But this past 2025, I don't have the 26 data yet, but 91.6% of households experiencing homelessness were households with just adults. And that was 97% of those who were unsheltered were adults. And so what we don't want is a system where we only have families with children shelters. That means people who are adults without children have nowhere to go. That's basically what we're saying here. And so what we want is for, to the greatest extent possible, you to design your projects where they can serve both households with children and households without children. So you can respond to the need at any given time, as well as regardless of gender. So, serve both males and females. And okay, so that's the point of that. We want to continue to increase the availability and flexibility of our rapid rehousing. And therefore, we want you, if you're going to do rapid rehousing, which is rental assistance, to offer that in as many counties as possible. And if you do 5 or more, you get the max points. And that way it allows people to live where they want to live, where they might have more support or a job or whatever, and not have to move somewhere else in order to get rental assistance. And let's see here. Again, it needs to be housing focused that minimizes barriers and program recipient or program requirements. And we do expect all rapid rehousing projects to use the National Alliance on Ending Homelessness core components of rapid rehousing. There's a toolkit and lots of information, including on our ESG page, for accessing the National Alliance core components and toolkit. A couple important requirements for rapid rehousing: the duration, how long can you provide rapid rehousing? The regulations state up to 24 months. And what we want you to do is to plan on providing rental assistance based on the need of a household. And so we don't want you to arbitrarily set caps of 3 months or 12 months or 6 months for all households, regardless of their individual need. We want you to be able to go up to the 24 months, theoretically, if you have the funding to do so, and you would evaluate the needs of the household on a periodic basis to adjust that rental assistance up or down based on their individual need. And then another important requirement is for lease requirements. We want the lease requirement between the tenant and the landlord to be for an initial term of 12 months. We will not allow any 6-month leases unless there is a waiver provided by KHC for extenuating circumstances. Both of those were in place this last time. That's the way it you all should have been operating your projects, and hopefully have been, but just know that that's the way we expect it to continue. And if you have any questions, of course, reach out to us for more information. A few more rapid rehousing requirements. Again, it needs to be low barrier and housing focused, and you can see what that means in the NOFA on pages 7 through 8. Essentially, you're limiting preconditions to getting into the program, and you're limiting requirements to staying in the program. And all rapid rehousing programs, including those that are just providing security deposits or utility deposits or last month's rent, must provide at a minimum housing search and placement, which is a specific activity of rapid ESG rapid rehousing, and housing stability case management. And you can provide these activities with ESG funding, or you can do it through match contributions or other sources, but they have to be provided one way or another. So essentially, you have to help people find housing, and you have to work with them through enrollment in your project with case management to make sure they're maintaining housing and are able to transition out. And then if you are a project, we do have some that is only providing security deposits or utility deposits or last month's rent. So that the difference is you're not going to be doing rental assistance. So if you're a project that is just going to be doing these smaller touches, if you will, it's not a just one and done, here's your money and goodbye. There's an expectation that you need to provide housing stability case management for at least 90 days from the time the participant moves into housing, or ensure that they have housing stability case management by another party if that's the case, if there is something available. But essentially, we don't want you to just issue the funding and then walk away, where people might encounter challenges that they could use help with in order to keep their housing. We want you to stay involved for a minimum of 90 days. It doesn't mean you're talking to them daily necessarily, but that you are available to provide case management for at least 90 days. I mentioned the National Alliance's core components. Just real quickly, that includes housing identification. So that's the housing search, rent and move-in assistance, which is rental assistance, as well as security deposits, other costs that are associated with that, and then ongoing case management. So very quick overview of what that means, but of course there's a lot more information from the National Alliance that you can review, and you can get that from our website. Reducing returns to homelessness. We want you obviously to work with people as much as possible to help them increase their income so they can maintain housing once they've left your program. We expect you to incorporate meaningful connections with employment opportunities and mainstream programs such as SSI and SSDI and other things. We know this is a lot to ask for not a lot of money, but we all know how important it is to have all these other supports. And you all are doing this anyway in your organizations, connecting people to lots of different resources. But we just want to make sure you're connecting it as part of your ESG program as well. For rapid rehousing requests, we do score those requests separately from your request for shelter, prevention, and street outreach. And essentially, what that means is you might ask for shelter and rapid rehousing. And so we essentially score most of that application or score those separately where you could score better for rapid rehousing than you did for shelter. And so you might receive funding for rapid rehousing and not shelter, or you might score well for both of those and get funding for both. But just know that they are scored separately. Both score sheets are on our website. So you can see there are several parts of the score sheet that are the same between the two or between the component types, but there are sections that are separate and distinct. And I apologize if you hear that noise. That's my cat with a hairball. Little comic relief, perhaps, since I'm droning on here. We do expect to award at least $1 million for rapid rehousing, but we have the right to do more or less just depending on the need. You will have 18 months, up to 18 months, to spend your 2026 allocation. You have from July 1st, 2026 through December 31st, 2027. That's 18 months to spend the funds. And you are expected to only request the amount of money that you can realistically spend in 18 months. Again, I made a point to say how little money we have to spread around. And we want folks to ask to request just what they can actually spend, because we don't want to be recapturing money at the end that we could have awarded to somebody else earlier on. And then, as I've said, the awardees will be eligible for renewal funding, assuming that everything goes as we anticipate for program year 27. All projects are required to participate in the Homeless Management Information System, HMIS, or if you're a victim service provider, what's called a comparable database. Comparable to HMIS is what that means. And there are certain approved vendors for that. Most or all of the members of Zero V already are using those. And we do have several agencies that use HMIS, even though they aren't ESG funded or COC funded, which is great. But just know that you will have to use that. If you are new to HMIS, you can, or even if you're not, you are able to ask for funding through this grant to help support HMIS costs. So there is money available. You will have to participate in the coordinated entry system. And so for rapid rehousing, that means you will take your referrals through coordinated entry. And for shelter, that means that you connect your folks that are in your shelter to coordinated entry. Same thing with street outreach. So there's various ways to participate, but you will be expected to do so. I mentioned earlier when we were going through what was on the ESG page, certifications and assurances. And I kind of went through that quickly. But definitely go take a look at that. Again, it's on our website. It's a document that has to be initialed and signed and attached to your application. And then if you are successful and are awarded ESG funds, it actually gets incorporated into your grant agreement. It essentially is laying out several of the policies and expectations that essentially you are certifying and assuring that you will follow and understand if you are a recipient of these funds. And so definitely before you get too deep into all of this, take a look at that. Make sure you're comfortable with it. Ask us questions if you have any. And yeah, so very important. Don't forget about that. Don't make it be a last thing you do and then be surprised. There's nothing new in it necessarily, except one small thing that I will point out. But more or less, it's essentially what's been there for several years, but there shouldn't be any surprises. One thing that is in this year's certifications and assurances, and there's a similar thing asking for contact information in the application itself. We've added a place that says that the person responsible for the operation of the ESG program or the administration of the ESG program locally, so day-to-day operation, is aware of, was involved in, and is aware of what was proposed in the application. And so you would attest to this in the certifications. Yes, this person, it could be an executive director, it could be a program manager, whoever is basically the person. If you said who's ultimately responsible for the local implementation, you are signing that that person knows that this application was submitted and what was proposed. In most circumstances, y'all are probably saying, what are you talking about? Because it's the same person. You've got one organization, one location. But we do have some organizations that are located in multiple counties. We do have organizations that are large enough where they have like whole departments that help with their applications that are completely separate from the program administrators on a day-to-day basis. And we have had instances before where essentially grant writers have proposed certain things and the administrators on the ground weren't aware necessarily that that's what happened. And so this is an effort to make sure that everyone's on the same page, because once you get the money, you got to hit the ground running, and there's not time to be like, what are you talking about? So hopefully that it's not a big deal, but just something to be aware of. Okay, so now we're moving into my personal favorite part of the webinar, which is talking about suggestions of how to complete a successful application, pro tips, if you will. So obviously you want to read the NOFA and you want to read it very carefully, and that might seem obvious, but just take the time to do it. You've got to remember that there are certain policies and priorities that we put in the NOFA that is telling you like what we're interested in, that if you had only read the regulations, for example, you would not know. So read the NOFA. It's telling you what you've got to do. Read the sample application before you get started. It's obviously telling you what's coming. And one of the reasons for that is, when you're working on an online application, sometimes like you can't move forward until you complete something. And so you can't like see the question coming ahead of you. I'm not necessarily saying that's the way that this UFA works entirely, but essentially by looking at it in the PDF format, which I know is not the easiest to read, but you at least get an idea of everything before you jump in. Definitely review the score sheets, because we are literally telling you how we are scoring you, like literally telling you. And so when you're responding to questions, you want to make sure you're responding in a way, obviously, that's answering the question, but is doing so in a way that is going to help the reviewers know that, well, essentially, the score sheet is telling you what we're expecting to see, more or less. Something that's really important is there are several questions, the narrative questions, that are multi-part. So it's asking you to include lots of different things in your response. And I know that's a pain, but it is what it is. And so we want you to make sure that you are reading it carefully and planning your response accordingly. So the multi-part questions, I have an example in the next slide or two. You want to make sure your response is responsive to each question. So anyway, let's go ahead and well, actually, let me continue with this for just a second. The other thing, this last bullet, I know there's a lot of words on these slides, and we've been going for an hour, and you might be having a hard time listening to the same person for the whole time, but you will be able to review these later. But essentially, you know, you want to really be detailed in your responses as much as you can. There are character limits. But you don't want to say something that would just be, we connect people with resources. Okay, well, everybody connects people with resources, I hope. What we want to know is specifically how you connect people with resources. Do you do that through providing transportation to various places? Do you do it by using some kind of an assessment to determine their needs? I mean, essentially tell us what that means. What does connect literally mean? That's what we're looking for. So do not worry, I'm not going to read this whole slide to you. You can go read this for fun later. This was used 2 years ago, the same example, but essentially what this is this is an example of how to respond to a multi-part question that has numbers in it, or even if it doesn't. But essentially, this question says, tell me how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. To get maximum points, include in your response, 1, detail the steps from start to finish. 2, what brand of bread, peanut butter, and jelly do you recommend? And 3, how do you suggest cutting the sandwich? So that's a lot. And so what we are saying is when you do your response, literally include the number 1 and then answer the first part. Literally include number 2, answer part 2. Literally include 3, answer part 3. That way you know you've covered all of the bases. We know you've covered all of the bases. We still have to decide if the information you submitted is sufficient, but it helps indicate this was intended to be a 3-part question, 3-part answer. And you can go and enjoy how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich response later, or not. I can't believe I wrote all that years ago. Okay, so character limits. Most of the questions requiring narrative responses do have a limit to the amount of characters you can use, and most of them are 2,000 characters. If you completed an application 2 years ago, most of them were 2,500 characters. So we've cut it down. I'm very wordy, and that's hard for me to do. Those of you who are good at being more succinct, probably not a big deal. But because we have so many applications to score, this was one of the ways we were hoping to help us be a little quicker. In addition, help you guys kind of condense your answers. And characters includes letters, numbers, dashes, punctuation, bullets, and spaces. And if it does have a character limit, the question will tell you at the end of the question what the character limit is. There are some questions that have higher character limits just because they're really big questions, but most of them you can anticipate about 2,000 characters. You absolutely can use abbreviations for words. It doesn't have to be like beautiful, full. I mean, we want you to write in sentences, but it doesn't have to, like, okay, you're probably not going to say, by the way, in your response, but if you wrote BTW, that would be okay, is what I'm saying. Don't make it a complete text, like as if you're sending a text, but in order to preserve characters, you can use abbreviations as long as it's something that's very common and you think that we would be able to understand what you were saying in your response. And so what we recommend very strongly, and we do this when we complete our applications for the COC program and HUD system, is that you write your responses in a word processor such as Microsoft Word, and then you can check your characters there and then copy and paste into the UFA. But this is very important, so please listen if you are doing something else. If you copy and paste your answers from, for example, Microsoft Word into the UFA, even if the character limits are longer than, let's say, 2,000 characters, or even if what you've written in Word, let's say it's 2,500 characters, and the character limit is 2,000, the UFA, unless something has changed that I'm not aware of, will still accept your full response. It looks like it will. You will not get a pop-up that says, stop, you've exceeded the limit. But what happens is when you are ready to submit it, or when you look at it, if you were to like scroll down to see what got pasted, it would have cut off at 2,000. So the last 500 words will not be there. So when you copy and paste over, you want to check that what you intended to be pasted in the UFA made it over. So if you are not familiar with how to check characters in Microsoft Word, I'm not familiar with other programs, but it's probably similar. But essentially on your tab, you've got your text, and on the top of the menu, you would select review. And then there is a place that says word count that I have circled. And once you click word count, this little pop-up pops up and it tells you how many words you have. But again, we're talking characters, not just words. And then it's got characters not including spaces and characters with spaces, so space between the characters. And that's what we're looking for. So you want that number to be at or less than whatever it said it was. So what's next? You want to talk to your partners in your local communities, and in particular, your Coordinated Entry Local Prioritization Community, or LPC. You probably are all familiar with that, what that is, but that those are the counties that mirror the Area Development District footprints. There's 15 LPCs across the balance of state, and those are the kind of community, the counties that work together mostly for coordinated entry purposes, for homelessness services. And so the reason we say talk to your folks in those areas is because that's the folks you're going to be partnering with the most. And so you want to talk about what's needed. Like, should one of us apply for rapid rehousing while the other one does prevention, or should we both do rapid rehousing and split up the counties? We want you to make decisions together. Review everything that we provided, again, on the ESG page, sample score sheets, certifications and assurances, etc. If you found this webinar today, you probably already get egrams, but in case you aren't on our egrams, we want to make sure you sign up for those. Let's see, it is the primary way and sometimes the only way we will be communicating regarding the ESG application. To sign up, you would go to KHC's webpage, go down to the bottom of the page. On the left-hand side, you see several icons, including an envelope. You click that, and it pops up and asks you to enter in your name and your email address. KHC has a ton of different listservs or email lists that you can sign up to get egrams for. The one you want, if you're interested in ESG or anything having to do with homelessness, is the one called Homeless and Support Services. We typically send those out on Wednesdays unless there is something time sensitive that needs to come out, but you can anticipate at least Wednesdays to get those. Just a reminder, if you are applying for emergency shelter, you have to include a signed certificate of local approval from your local government, wherever your shelter is located. So if you are located in, well, anyway, your local government has to, whoever is authorized to sign, has to say, yes, essentially, we're okay with this shelter being in our community. And it can take a while to get those back sometimes. And again, you only have until May 15th to submit. So I strongly encourage you to go ahead and start pursuing that certification so you can get that back. There is a copy of the certification on our ESG page of our website that you can use and the local government can sign. And it's got the boxes that they complete. But go ahead and start that immediately. Even if you end up not applying, you want to go ahead and start now, just so you don't get to the end and then have a crisis with that. And again, it only has to be in the area where your shelter is located. So it doesn't have to be all counties in your LPC. If you're doing a shelter in Warren County, then it's the local government in Warren County. And then we started this 2 years ago. This is not for scoring purposes. This is just for information purposes for us to better understand your shelters. We will require again this year that you attach a minimum of 1 picture each of a bedroom or a sleeping area, a bathroom, a kitchen, and a shared or communal space. This just helps us kind of see what your shelter's like. We know that photographs won't capture it completely, but it helps us understand your setting just a little bit more. And that will be part of attachments, but not scored. If you have any questions, and I'm sure you might, the best way to reach us is through our help desk. It's actually called the Partner Agency Portal, but I left help desk on here by mistake. When you go to the help desk or the Partner Agency Portal, at the top, there's a place that says submit a request, and you click that. It's got some prompts. It'll ask you, what's your question related to, and you can select Emergency Solutions Grant and whatever question. The reason why we request that you use this Partner Agency Portal / help desk is it goes to multiple people have access to it, so it doesn't necessarily get lost in someone's email inbox, like mine, for example. But if you need to reach out to me directly, you're always welcome to do that. But again, try to use the help desk if you can. And then there's a phone number as well that you can call. And, oh my goodness. I thought I had exited out, but I don't think I did. Okay, so that is the end. I accidentally closed down the slideshow before I meant to, but there weren't any more slides. Um, let's see. Michelle did not stop me, so I guess we haven't had any
Well,
questions.
I was looking at the chat. I didn't get any notifications in the Q&A, but I see there are a few in the Q&A box.
Okay.
What's the deadline for the capacity scorecard? Would that be May 15th?
Yes, and that's an excellent question. I should have
Mhm.
highlighted that. So the capacity scorecard is a KHC set of questions, for those of you who might not be familiar, that ask about the capacity of your organization, basically. It's not scored, even though it's called scorecard, so it's a little confusing. It's used by all the programs that KHC funds. It's a set of standard questions. You have to do it as kind of a threshold to get through or to be able to submit the application. It used to be that we required that you submitted the KHC capacity scorecard first before you could access the rest of the application. We used to have a deadline that was maybe 2 weeks before the final deadline. We no longer are doing that. We just have one deadline for everything, including the capacity scorecard, which is May 15th. So once you access the application, you can access the whole thing, capacity scorecard and everything else, and it's all due on May 15th.
Okay.
Was that the only one?
No, there are several from Juliana, but she had to leave.
Uh-huh.
And she said that
Okay.
she could follow up with an email with some of these questions, but I think some of them are relevant to everyone. What all
Okay.
can be used for matching funds? Just want to verify that we can use volunteer hours. That's one question.
Um, are you able to answer that particular volunteer hour question, or do you want Rosemary to?
So, yes, on an overall, that's a yes. But I will say that our grants management team is getting ready to have an office hours on matching funds. Um, and what is eligible to be used as matching. So you might want to watch for that in the eGram that's coming up in May. I think it's before the application is due, but I'm not sure. But that is a good question. But yes, you can use volunteer hours as matching. And there's a whole list of things that we can send out on that too.
Okay. Is it something we have ready to go now or soon? Like that we could post on our website, on the ESG page, or not?
I will check for, I'll have to check because I'm not sure it's ESG specific. I might have to filter it out. So I'll
Okay.
check on that today.
So I'm going to start with saying, if you look at the ESG interim rule 24 CFR 576, and you look under the components that say what the eligible activities or eligible cost are, anything that you could pay for with ESG funds, you can count that as match if it is provided through another source. So that's where you want to start. That makes it an eligible match activity. The source of funds is dictated mainly by whether or not, like if it's donations from communities, that's how you're getting the monies, through donations. There's no restrictions on how donations can be used. And so, yes, that you can use donations to pay for whatever the eligible activity is. I probably shouldn't say the only, but like if a funding source says you cannot use this money for match, which I'm not familiar with many that would say that, then you couldn't use the money for match. That's unlikely to happen, but it could. But if you have specific questions like volunteers, which we know volunteer hours can be used, but if you have those kind of questions, send them through the help desk and we will get very specific responses back if you have something that's very specific.
And also Rosemary's on this call if she does want to add anything on that. She's kind of the expert there.
Yeah, I
Let's
don't
see.
necessarily have anything to
Rosemary?
add to that specifically, but looking at our calendar for the web, our office hours actually do fall right outside of the
Okay.
deadline. They're going to be on May 20th because that's just the next one we have. So yeah, I would send specific questions to the help desk and y'all can pass them on and we can get those sorted out appropriately. But what I will say about match is, should you identify, and I think this is safe to say, should you identify something on your application and then find out later you either don't have access to those funds or that they were not an eligible source, you can propose to a different match source once you're funded to kind of make that right. That's kind of a correctable thing that you can do, but send your questions in if you're worried about any of your match source options.
Thank you, Rosemary. Anything else, Michelle?
For street outreach, can this be coordinated with local police departments? And how does a small group speak accurately completing street outreach?
How does a small group what? Speak accurately, is that what you said?
Yeah, speak about it accurately completing street outreach. I think how to approach maybe.
Okay, let's start with the first question. Oh, wait, Cassie might want to speak. I can unmute Cassie. Was that from Cassie or Juliana? Let's see.
Yes.
Hey,
I
Miss
think from
Shay.
the same
Yeah, this
organization.
is a question. This is a question for Juliana. We're working with her on this grant. The question derives from, we don't necessarily go out and do street outreach, but we work and coordinate with those who do. Whether that's the police departments, whether that's Salvation Army, Life Nav Outreach, and all these other organizations that do outreach. But we as an organization don't necessarily go out besides our outreach events like job fairs and things like that, going to events, resource fairs like the military expo this weekend. That's where she's getting that question from, is how do we say the work that we do in street outreach, but we don't necessarily directly put boots on the ground ourselves.
So I think it's probably would be more useful, and I think Juliana said this, that she'd follow up with an email, maybe to have a separate phone call, make sure we're talking about the same thing. Because the funding would need to support like your actual work you're doing, and there would be like remember, you have to participate. So you're going to be serving specific clients. You're going to need to have them entered into HMIS. So it may or may not make sense to request funding, depending on how you want to use the funds, would dictate whether or not it makes sense and if it would be eligible to use the street outreach funds for a specific project. Essentially, I think
Outreach at all.
I think we probably need
part
to
of
have a
our
separate
application.
conversation because what'd you say?
So we don't necessarily have to
What'd you
apply
say?
for street outreach. All the, yes.
You're cutting off a little bit for me. Are you still there?
Yes, ma'am. There seems to be a delay in my mic coming up.
I'm sorry. How about we schedule a call to talk through this a little bit more? And I'm going to assume that in the delay you said, okay, Shay, that sounds wonderful. Okay.
She said a call would be
Sorry, we
great.
couldn't be more direct. Okay.
Yeah. Would medical respite be
Did
eligible?
Rebecca have a question?
Yeah, that's what I'm asking. Would medical respite be eligible for shelter funding?
Rebecca, I think the answer is, I was going to say an easy yes, then I stopped myself. And what we're talking about here is a program that is in a shelter-like setting, a physical space, where people are there. Actually, now we need to think about this.
Yeah,
Take
that's
my
why I
yes
wanted
back.
to ask.
We need to understand more about who is eligible to go to medical respite. Like, is it people exiting hospitals
Yes.
who
It's
need
people exiting the
care?
hospital.
Okay,
Mhm.
okay. I think where I need help from my colleagues in answering you is to determine whether or not those folks would meet the definition of literal homelessness. Perhaps based on where they were prior
Mhm.
to entering the hospital, or if that
So-
would matter for an emergency shelter eligibility.
So anybody who comes into medical respite is someone who is experiencing homelessness, and would be exited back onto the street to recover if they did not come into medical respite.
Do you know if they were experiencing literal homelessness before they went to the hospital?
Yes, they would be.
Okay, Rosemary, thank goodness. I see you unmute yourself.
So at that point, I think it's definitely going to depend on how long they were in the we're going to look at that institutional setting definition to ensure that they haven't exceeded the amount of time that would make them ineligible for category 1.
Which would be 90 days.
Yeah, I was looking for that because CV changed it and I couldn't remember which was which.
Most of the people that we are getting are people who have been in for less than 15 to 20 days because they've had some type of surgery or are getting some type of cancer treatment, something of that sort.
Mhm. So,
Initially, I would say yes then.
yeah. I think and generally initially we start with a yes. There's nothing that excludes medical respite in and of itself from ESG emergency shelter funding. I think it then goes to the follow-up questions of the people must fit into or to use it must be, fit into category 1 homelessness, basically. And so maybe a phone call as well, Rebecca.
Yes, that'd be great.
Because one of the things I'm curious about is, like, are there circumstances where it wouldn't be that, and how could we work around? We just haven't had this situation before. We're thrilled there is a medical respite program, but at least in the past 10 years that I've been here, we have not had this specific type of shelter seeking funding. So we just need to talk it through a little bit.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We'll give
More
you-
yes than no at the moment, though.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Okay. Anything else I'm missing?
Yeah, there's a follow-up from Cassie, following up to Juliana's question. Says, I think the question really is, do we have to apply for all components, or can we just apply for the components that we actually work in and do? Are applications proved according to individual components, or is it an inclusive application? You lose points for not having all as part of your program.
That's an excellent question. Thank you so much, Cassie. So no, you do not have to apply for all the components. You can apply for just one or all of them. There is not a disincentive to only apply for just one. There is not a benefit necessarily for applying for all. Years ago, we used to I can't even remember, we either required rapid rehousing or we gave more points for how much you asked for rapid rehousing. We don't do that anymore. What we have determined is that local communities and local organizations need to determine what your own specific needs are. And in your communities, there might be someone that's really good at rapid rehousing and someone else that's really good at shelter and someone else that's really good at street outreach. And so that could be 3 different applications, 3 different organizations. We have communities where there's one game in town and you need to try to do it all, and that's fine as well. But if you're not doing street outreach, Cassie, from Camp Graves, Cassie, you don't need to apply for street outreach. That's perfectly fine. The sample application is going to show you all of the different components. So that might lead to a little confusion, but it's going to show you all the different components. But there's a question in there when you get to it. This is why you want to read it real carefully. That I can't remember off the top of my head which one it is, but in the UFA itself, it says, which components do you want to apply for? And you click, obviously, the relevant ones. And depending on what you click in the UFA is what you can see. So if you only select emergency shelter, then you only get the emergency shelter questions. You're not going to see street outreach. You're not going to see rapid rehousing, et cetera. But it's so important that you get those check boxes right of what you want, because if you wanted rapid rehousing, but you didn't complete that section because you didn't click that box, you're not getting rapid rehousing. But to sum it up, no, you don't have to ask for everything. Just ask for what you want to do. Okay, well, it is 11:30. I've kept you here for an hour and a half. Just want to confirm, Michelle, are there any other questions or that I'm missing?
I do not see any further questions.
Okay, well, I know we've covered a lot. There's, as you go through materials, you probably will think of questions. That's perfectly fine. Don't hesitate to reach out. Try to use the help desk partner agency portal if you can. If we need to hop on a call, we can do that as well. But start by reading the materials, and if you can't find the answer directly there, then certainly reach out and we'll be more than happy to help. We really appreciate all the work you're going to be doing to put this together in a short time frame. We know it's not fun, but you know, it's very important work and we appreciate it, and we wish we had so much more money to fund everybody for everything that you ask for, but we just don't. Okay, well, with that, again, the recording will be posted as well as the slides, probably not till tomorrow, unless we get lucky, but they will be made available. So thank you all for your time. Thank you. I need to stop saying thank you so we can get off the call. Okay, talk to you later. Bye-bye.